Okay, great. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in for the webinar on occupational therapy. So I feel very grateful to be able to spend the morning with you guys and tell you all about how OTs can help. So I'll just go into my first slide, which talks a little bit about me. So I am an occupational therapist and I'm registered with the College of Occupational Therapists in BC. I'm also a member of the Canadian Association of OTs. So I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology and my master's degree is in occupational therapy. I spent a number of years working in a hospital and I still work there time to time. And so I worked all over the city from the Fraser Valley to Vancouver Coastal Health, and it's been great. I've had amazing opportunities to interact with individuals. I founded my company in 2014. I am a PWR Moves certified therapist, and you will find me teaching boxing classes at NeuroFit in Vancouver, BC, and also in Richmond, BC. Interestingly enough, prior to becoming an OT, I used to be a professional dancer. So you used to find me performing and competing in Bollywood and Bhangra, which is an Indian dance style across North America. So I put in a cute little photo to show that I have a life when I'm not working as an OT. And I do continue to teach dance classes here and there. And due to the type of dance, which uses really big moves, I'm actually able to incorporate these dance moves in my power classes. So if you ever end up coming to a NeuroFit class or one of my power classes in Richmond, you may get a chance to try these dance moves out. So this is the big question everyone wants to know the answer to. Who are occupational therapists? Well, we are known as OTs because that term is very long. And all of us have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree. And so we have specialized knowledge and skills to recommend a specific course of preventative or corrective action to allow people to lead more productive and satisfying lives. We are trained to understand the medical and the physical components of disability or injury, but also the psychosocial factors and how this affects the functioning of the whole person, because this has a very big impact on their health and wellness. So OTs are a regulated medical profession, just like speech language pathologists or physiotherapists. So occupational therapists must be registered with their provincial regulator. And in BC, that is the College of OTs of British Columbia. So what is OT? Well, the technical definition is the art and science of enabling engagement in everyday living through occupation. We try to enable people to perform the occupations that foster health and well-being, and we want to enable a just and inclusive society so that all people may participate to their potential in the daily occupations of life. So in general, it is the process of helping people do things that they find important in their lives. So everyone says, well, I don't know if I have an occupation, I'm not working any longer, I have no issues at my work. Well, in the world of occupational therapy, we have a slightly different definition for occupation. So your occupation could be a mother, a grandparent, a husband, a daughter, perhaps you're still working as a lawyer, accountant, maybe you're going to school or gone back to school. Maybe you're a Parkinson's Society of BC group facilitator, or perhaps you like to golf in your spare time, or maybe you're a comedian. I have a lot of those in my boxing classes. So whatever your occupation is, or whatever you spend your time doing, that is your occupation. It does not always need to be paid work. So who can benefit from OTs? So once again, just because you're not working does not mean that you can't benefit from an OT. Almost anyone can benefit from having an OT. In particular, anyone having difficulty participating in activities due to an illness or disability, and we like to call those the person components, or if someone is struggling due to the social, institutional, or physical environment. And we call those parts environmental components. So what would happen if you saw an OT? Well, we will assess and evaluate your occupational performance. And what this means is your ability to choose, organize, and effectively and safely perform everyday activities, whether it's washing the dishes, whether it's going for a run, on the golf course, playing with your grandchildren, anything that's an everyday activity. So a lot of OTs, we use a really specific model. It's called the CMOP-E, and the really long name is the Canadian Model of Occupational Performance and Engagement. This model illustrates the relationship between the person, their occupation, and their environment. So let's talk a little bit about this Canadian model of occupational performance and engagement. So we talked about the environment. So as an OT, I look at the environment and I look at the physical setup. So I'll take a look and just be like, okay, are there stairs to enter this building? Is there enough space in the doorway for a wheelchair to fit through? I would look at the social components, so the people in their lives. I would look at the institutional components, so looking at the way their life is set up, the hierarchy of maybe their job or the legislation that's in the city that they live. I would also look at the cultural components. So the environment is different both physically and culturally, whether you live in North America or the Middle East or India or Africa or Europe. Then we move on to the person components. So once again, I look at the person's physical abilities. So similar to how a physiotherapist would look at someone's physical abilities. I would look at their affective and emotional abilities, so how they are feeling. And then I also look at their cognition, so how their brain is working. Attention, memory, planning, things like that. But at the center of this model is something we call spirituality. So the essence of life, whatever you think is the most important thing. So talking about the environmental components. So I talked a bit about what are environmental components. So once again, what are the barriers to a person participating in the activity they want to participate in? So maybe I would take a look at the playground for a child and be like, okay, there's lots of stairs there. There's no way that that wheelchair can go up those stairs. So then I help the person and perhaps the playground officials or the city brainstorm, how can I get this child onto the playground? Let's talk about ramps. And that falls in the area of adaptive equipment. Then I also maybe look at the noise. A lot of people can't concentrate if there's noise around there. So if there is a student that has challenges with writing an exam, perhaps I would recommend that the student go and have a quiet private room for writing the exam to enable them to write this exam successfully due to their diagnosis of depression or anxiety because they are not able to do so in a loud room. I have to look at the geography. So if I'm ever recommending anything, I have to look, does this person live in a city? Do they live in a small town? Because once again, if you live in a city, you have lots of access to services. If you're in a small town, maybe not so much. I also have to look at things like the terrain. So if I'm recommending a wheelchair, the type of wheelchair I'd recommend for someone in the city going over sidewalks and curbs would be very different than the type of wheelchair I would recommend for someone living up north who has maybe very cold temperatures in which certain pieces of equipment may break, and maybe they need different tires to go over those gravel roads. I also look at housing. So are the doorways wide enough for a wheelchair or a walker to go through? Does the person need any sort of ramp? Do they need, anything else put in there? So I would definitely take a look at those things. So for social, I look at the person's support system. Support systems are so important. So for example, If you have a social support system and they're cheering you on and they're your encouragement and your motivators, this is a really important thing that will help you get through tough times in life, regardless if it's a diagnosis of Parkinson's or anything else. So I might try and see if I can hook someone up with a support system in the community. And Parkinson's Society of BC, they are fabulous and have the support groups. And as an OT, I think it's an amazing thing. I also look at the social norm and expectations. So this ties in a bit to cultural. So once again, I have to take into account the social norm and expectations of someone living in the Middle East and make sure that whatever recommendations or things I'm looking at are in line with those. Institutional. So I do need to take a quick look and say, okay, what are the financial restraints that this individual has? I can't recommend the most expensive wheelchair. I can't recommend a whole top to floor home renovation. Or perhaps I just need to help the person to access funding to get their home renovated. I need to look at the legal implications. So I can't just walk in and ask a school to redo their entire school because a child can't access it. Once again, there's certain legal restraints around things and I have to follow that. Same thing with policies as well. There's a lot of those in place and I do have to abide by those. I look at the resources. So I might try and see what resources are available in this college or university for someone, or perhaps within the workplace. So if someone works at a big organization, they often have an HR department or a wellness committee, and I try and hook the person up with that to enable them to remain at work if they'd like to. So when I'm talking about cultural, I have to think about roles. So in some cultures, women have certain roles, which is looking after the kids and cooking. And so I have to abide by those rules and help people attain their goals to remain in those roles. I look at the person's values. So once again, if a lady walks into my clinic and I'm trying to teach her how to cook and she has never had any value around cooking, that's not really me respecting her values. If her value is gardening, then that is something I would focus on. Expectations. So once again, knowing the cultural expectations of someone and helping to facilitate them to be able to meet those expectations. That's an expert area that OTs work in. And the last bit is customs. So once again, depending where I'm working or what culture I'm working with, I have to be aware of whether or not I'm allowed to put my hands on someone, whether they're male or female. And I always have to keep these things in mind, even if I'm applying an OT treatment plan. And sometimes I might have to get creative and get my male OT assistant to assist another male client if their customs do not allow me to do so directly. So then I look at the person components. So I take a look at what the person is challenged with. So I take a look and I measure their strength, their endurance, their range of motion. So how far you can reach with your limbs, your arms and your legs, your mobility. So how are you walking? How's your balance? Do you use any gait aids? So that would mean something like a walker or a wheelchair or a cane. I look at affective emotional. So how are you feeling? Are you feeling a little bit down since your diagnosis of Parkinson's? I look at their expression of self. So how are they feeling about themselves right now? Are they able to engage in their art or anything else that they found important? And I also look at their cognition. So how is their attention? Are they able to actually attend to the words coming out of my mouth or pay attention during a boxing class? Or how are they when they are trying to pay attention when the doctor is giving them information on the dosing of their medications? How's their memory? Once they go home from the doctor's office, how much do they remember about their memory and the things that the doctor said? I take a look at their problem solving. So when they're stuck at work and they're trying to figure out a problem, have there been any changes in their ability to problem solve? Or are they still able to do it as fast and easily as before? I look at someone's multitasking. So knowing if it's a mom and she has to do the grocery list in her head while she's driving her kids to school and also yelling at her children to get their shoes on and get out the door. That's a lot of multitasking, and it's my job to see if I can make that easier. Lastly, I look at organization. So a lot of people at work, they're managers, they are directors, and looking to see, are they able to do this effectively and easily? Are they feeling quite cognitively drained? Is their brain fried at the end of the day? I also ask a lot of these questions when people come to see me. And last but not least, I look at the person's spirituality. So what I do is I look at what the person finds important and what drives them. So maybe it's religion, maybe they're just a spiritual person, maybe it's just their feelings around family and life and fate. So no matter what they call their spirituality, it's my job to respect it and help them to reach their full potential. So let's get into the more practical components here. So how can OTs help? So we enable people to perform the following activities as independently as possible. So the areas we focus on are self-care and home management, productivity, and leisure. So you're probably wondering what some of these words mean. So here we go. So what is self-care? OTs often refer to this as activities of daily living. So these are the things you do to take care of yourself. So bathing, dressing, grooming, so that's brushing your teeth, that's combing your hair, toileting, so getting on and off the toilet, but also all the steps involved in toileting, and feeding. So feeding is using a spoon, using a fork and knife together, maybe using your fingers for food, holding a hot dog or a hamburger with this lovely summer weather. So next, what is home management, otherwise known as instrumental activities of daily living? These are things you do to manage your home and life. So here are some examples: cooking, cleaning, banking, grocery shopping, driving. So once again, when I come into people's homes, some people might say, you know what, my husband does all the cooking and cleaning, banking, all I do is grocery shopping and driving. And that's fine. So all I would help someone to do is help them to be able to succeed at the items that they want to do, which is continuing grocery shopping and driving. So what is productivity? So we call it things you do to occupy your time. So it might be education, so student, it might be work, and it might be volunteering. So there's lots and lots of different things that people do to occupy their time. What is leisure? So these are things you do for enjoyment, and it can be anything. It can be reading a book. It can be going for a walk. Any sort of hobbies, sports, or social activities. So I have a cute picture of people dancing. I know a lot of people like to dance for fun, or maybe playing basketball on the weekend. One of the interesting things that Plato mentioned is lack of activity destroys the good condition of every human being, while movement and methodical exercise save it and preserve it. So the great thing about most of our hobbies, sports, and social activities is they are generally a good form of exercise, whether it's knitting or crocheting and working on your hands and your fingers, or turning the pages of a book. Either way, as an OT, I love to tackle the area of leisure because it's something that people love to do. So let's get into the more specifics here. How can an OT help you? Well, there's a few specific strategies you might take or ways of approaching the situation. We might try and do remediation of the deficits. So we might try and teach someone the skills to address the deficits or challenges they're having and restore the function that they had prior to the diagnosis or the injury. So in this day and age, we have a lot of therapeutic computer games, and we use this to simulate problem-solving scenarios, attention to detail, speed and accuracy of response. So yeah, I guess there is sometimes a benefit to video games. Depends on how you use it. And a few other things we might do. We might teach clients how to use public transportation. So maybe this is something that someone did independently prior to their stroke or brain injury. So off I would go into the community and teach someone how to use it again. The other thing I might do is instruct someone in a compensatory technique. So what that means is adapting a task or routine to make it a little bit easier. I might give the other team members or the other staff members in their workplace tips for interactions. So for example, if someone had a stroke and they require a little bit more time for processing their thoughts, I might let the manager and the other staff members in the department know, with the person's consent, obviously, just to give people more time when they are asked a question, to give them time to generate the answer. This allows the persons to still participate in the tasks that they consider important. I've just adapted it to make it a little bit easier. What are some other compensatory techniques? Well, I might provide some adaptive equipment. So I might provide an environmental support, such as a higher chair because the person is struggling with sit to stands. I might give an external support to compensate for impaired skills. So I might be telling the person, I need you to carry your notebook everywhere, write notes down there because you're not remembering things as much. I might give them a memory board at home to record and remember all their medications and what time they're taking them at. Another thing I often do is in this generation, a lot of people from every age use their phone as reminders. So I might tell them, okay, let's practice using your phone, putting in everything you need to do, and let's set some alarms. I might provide a mobility device, such as walking poles, wheelchairs, walkers, canes. All of these things are compensatory techniques because I'm giving the person something to make their lives a little bit easier. However, it still allows them to engage in their activity, which is walking or going to the mall or socializing with their friends at their bridge group. One of the last things I might do is a home modification. So I'll get a little bit more into this as we get further on in our webinar, but we give lots of equipment for people to use at home and just make everyday activities easier. There are lots of exercises, stretches, or splints that I might give someone to maintain cognitive or physical function. So we all know that exercise can help maintain our balance and our gait and our mobility, along with stretching, so making sure we're very agile and able to reach things. And one of the specialized things that OTs do is we can also provide splints. And on the next few slides, we'll give you a few more details on what that is. So general OT recommendations. So as an OT, I always try and give task-specific exercises. So if I'm going into the environment and the person used to be a cook, I'm going to work with them with the actual knives or the actual food that they used as a cook. And this would be hand therapy rehabilitation. So let's say someone had a fracture, they're returning to work, and their job is a cook. In addition to these exercises and modified ways of doing the cutting of the vegetables, I might actually give them a splint. So everyone's asking, well, what's a splint? A splint is something that's made out of neoprene or plastic. And what it does is, if you have a hand fracture and it needs to be kept in one position, it's similar to a knee brace. It actually supports the limb and prevents it from getting into a strange angle. Another thing that a splint is very handy for, if it's a plastic one, which an OT can custom make for you, is if you have arthritis. So people that have arthritis, their hands are very painful at various points throughout the day. If you put a splint on your hand, which is custom made for you, it can keep your hand in a nice, neutral, resting position. So there's a little tip for the day. So what's some of the medical equipment that we could use? Well, there's a walker, there's a wheelchair, and we all know what those look like. So we will give this if someone wants to increase their mobility and get out of the house. We will see what we can do to make this happen. One of the most interesting things is, yes, I understand Costco does sell walkers, and I think they might sell wheelchairs at this point too. But the really important thing is that a person gets a healthcare professional, such as an occupational therapist or physical therapist, to measure them and ensure that this walker or wheelchair is the right height for them, the right width for them, because we're not all the same weight or width or height. But also maybe they need a few adaptations because maybe they had a stroke and their arm needs to be propped on that wheelchair. So that is one important thing to note. Let's talk a bit about cognitive exercises. So if someone has an acquired brain injury and they're struggling with memory and attention, I might give someone exercises for their brain. And this will help them to have the skills to re-enter the workforce. They'll probably not be able to go back right away, and it will take time, but we will do what we can to get them back there. There's a few other things we might do. There's something called gross motor development training. So what that is training the big muscles, and this will allow a child to play at a school playground following an injury. We might do fine motor development, so that's those small, intricate exercises or motions you do with your fingers, such as zipping up a jacket, buttoning it, cutting food with a fork and knife. We will do this often with children and give them exercises so they can learn to print or hold a pencil. But I also do fine motor exercises with people that have Parkinson's, and I'll get a little bit more into that later on. One of the last things you might do is group therapy with a client with schizophrenia, depression, or anxiety to help build their social skills. And this will enable the person to engage in conversations and interact with their community and maintain friends, because we already know how important social supports are. So let's get into the most specific thing that you're all dying to hear about. What are some OT recommendations for people that have Parkinson's disease? Well, we have lots of nifty tips and tricks for organization. We've already talked a bit about it, so using your phone, having a memory board, things like that. What people will often do is if people are still working, they will actually get an OT to come into their workplace. And once they get a really good understanding of their job, then I can give them more specific tips and tricks. Because not all of these recommendations work for everyone. I want them to be something that you would use and that you would like. We also focus on energy conservation and pacing. So what that means is, if we're talking about energy conservation, is knowing that we have a certain amount of energy and you don't want to use it all up, or you're not going to get a chance to do everything you want. So we know that we have to space out the things that we want to do throughout the day or throughout the week. So maybe rather than having all your friends visit you on a Saturday, perhaps you could spread it out throughout the week and do some on a Saturday, some on a Sunday, some throughout the week. But maybe not on the days that you have boxing class with me, because that might be a little tiring. Let's talk a little bit about pacing. So for those of you that are runners or are used to doing a million things in a day, you know you can't get it all done within 15, 20 minutes. You need to pace yourself. You need to know you have a certain amount of energy and you need to go at a nice, steady pace. And what that will do is it'll help you to be able to complete the task. So ergonomic assessments. We talked a little bit about OTs going into the workplace. I often go into the workplace because people can't focus on things. It's too loud. It's too noisy. The glare of the screen is really getting to people. They can't read on the screen. So yes, I'll go in to do a proper ergonomic assessment to make sure that your desk height and your chair height and your monitor for your computer is not straining your neck or your back. But I will also do these other assessments to ensure that people can focus and attend to the tasks at work. We also have the wonderful use of technology, and that sometimes we might give some fancy recommendations. They might be a little pricier, but in this day and age, people really like technology. There's lots of memory aids that we've chatted about. So once again, those are some great things to use. I use lots of those. Sticky notes, writing notes, they're handy. Another OT recommendation is we might recommend anxiety reduction. We understand that feelings of anxiety, even if you don't have a diagnosis of anxiety, can impact your ability to do things. So I always notice this during my boxing classes. When I tell people I'm going to give them a new task to do, everyone gets a little bit nervous. But I try and break the ice with a little bit of humor and get rid of everyone's feelings of anxiety. That helps everyone to actually engage in the next task. Sleep hygiene. Everyone wonders what that is. Well, making sure that your room is at a nice cool temperature, that it's dark, that you have no interruptions. So once again, maybe putting your phones on silent or do not disturb. Maybe telling your dogs that they can't sleep on the bed tonight, maybe they have to sleep in the next room. So there's little tips and tricks, and there's a few more we can go through, but we don't have time for it today, about how an OT can help you with sleep hygiene. One of the biggest things that people forget is that they cannot exercise really close to bed because their heart rate's going so fast and they can't relax. So maybe just figuring out where's the best time to put in your exercise, because it's not before bed. We might do some home safety assessments and go into people's homes to prevent falls. There's a lot of clutter in everyone's homes these days, and sometimes there's phone cords, cords for the lights and for the lamps, and those are all tripping hazards. So as an OT, I might go into your home and do a few recommendations to prevent people from tripping and falling. So moving on to the next bit. So we might recommend lots of equipment for the bedroom or bathroom just to make your life easier. So those of you that have maybe had a hip replacement or knee replacement, you know that we've recommended grab bars beside the toilet or near the bathtub. We've recommended bath seats to get yourself in and out of a bathtub. I have actually used one of those and I broke my leg, so I will have to say they are a lifesaver. We might also recommend some ramps to get in and out of your home a little bit easier. If you're towards the end of your life for palliative, or perhaps you just don't have the energy or strength to lift yourself out of bed or a wheelchair, there's wonderful moving lifts. And we also have furniture risers. These are awesome. If you are struggling with sit to stands and you can't get off that low favorite chair, we might plop in some furniture risers at the bottom of your chair, and all it does is it raises the height of your chair. So a few other things we might do with your bathroom is we know that people's vision changes due to the changes in your ability to see contrast. So what we'll do is we'll just make it easier for you to see everything throughout the home by changing the colors. A few other things we might do. We might give adapted equipment for clothing, eating utensils, buttons, zippers. So one of the biggest things I always tell people is do not get a weighted utensil for your eating. People think that's the easiest thing to do. Don't do it. It's really not. We actually recommend that people get lighter utensils. A few other things you might do is when you're going through things and you're trying to do your buttons and your zippers, we might actually give you a different technique to use, or we might give you an adapted zipper. And there's really cool things that we can do, and I'll get into that in a bit. A few other things that we can do. I often tell people, if you're struggling to make the bed, try and safety pin your sheet to the duvet. That makes it a one-stop shop. Only one motion needed to make your bed. That would make my life easier. We talk a lot about exercise and stretching. So here's a few tips for you. If you're struggling to do those buttons and those zippers in the morning, first thing I always tell people to do those wonderful power hand flicks. They are amazing. Do 10 of those before you go to do your buttons and your zippers. It will make your life so much easier. Few other things. We all know about exercise and amplitude and intensity training. Amplitude means really high, big motions. So when people are trying to get out of bed, I always tell them to do this awesome arm flare and make a really big motion when they're getting out of bed. And once again, makes life a little easier. Going back to the weighted utensils and how we're not supposed to use them, I always tell people with this amplitude again, try and do really big cuts. You can say it to yourself. You can picture it and try to do it. And that will help to make cutting of that steak easier. And using that same thing about amplitude, I always tell people to do a really big pinch for those zippers, pull it out in front of you so you can see it. That makes life so much easier. And once again, that zipper will go up in a flash. One of the fun things I like to do is link all my activities with music. We all know that having a beat, if you have Parkinson's, makes life so much easier. So I tell people, blast your favorite music in the morning. Have that beat that you like to tap your feet to, and who knows, these activities might just get really easy. One of the last things I wanted to talk about is fine motor exercises. So we focus a lot on handwriting and printing. So we know that when people have Parkinson's, sometimes their handwriting and printing becomes really small and illegible. So as an OT, there's certain exercises I can give people or printing programs to help maintain the size and legibility of your printing. If you wanted a quick tip, I always tell people, make sure you have lined paper. use those lines as a visual cue for your printing and handwriting to make sure that the size remains the same. So there you go. There's a few tips and tricks. And I would say, though, my favorite tip and trick for the day is to probably have that wonderful wide power stance while washing dishes. It makes you feel like you're doing a little bit of exercise. And once again, we always want to use that wide, big, chest up, arms out, feet apart power stance whenever we're doing any sort of standing. It will help with everything. So let's talk more about anxiety reduction. How can OTs help? Well, we have specific anxiety reduction programs, so you can work with us on a program, and that will reduce your overall levels of anxiety. These are really, really specific. Once again, you do not need to have a diagnosis of anxiety. It is just a very useful program if you have feelings of anxiety. There's other practical and specific strategies such as deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, sensory strategies such as weighted blankets, soothing music, or even the use of animals that will help people feel less anxious. So I put up our clinic dog Enzo there because he is a great resource for all our teens and kids and adults that come to our clinic. He's a really great calming presence. So any sort of strategy we give you, we would practice first in the clinic, and then we would actually go with you out into the community with support, because you have us there, and practice these skills while you're doing everyday activities. It's not good enough just to practice it in the clinic or in your home. You actually need to practice it in the community once you're comfortable with it. Same thing with cognitive behavioral therapy. And all that is really changing your mindset and your frame of mind and how you're thinking about situations. There's exposure therapy if you're really scared and anxious of certain things. Once again, it's a really specific type of therapy that OTs can do in the area of mental health, and it helps people get over their fears. What is our goal with anxiety reduction? We want people to independently use an anxiety reduction strategy, and we want to decrease overall the level of anxiety that is impacting a person's ability to engage with their loved activities or their loved ones and their people. So let's talk about driving. This is everyone's hated area, but it has to be talked about. So how can an OT help? Well, an OT can help evaluate your driving capacity. We can ensure your seating posture in the vehicle is optimal for you specifically. So everyone has different body sizes, heights, width, spines, your neck is at a different angle. And what we want is we want for you to be comfortable and safe. So we can go in and do a little assessment to make sure you're seated properly. We might give some interventions or vehicle modifications tailored to you. So some of our shorter ladies, they do need cushions to be able to see over the dashboard. We might give another intervention about warming up your muscles before you get in the car. We might recommend some adapted equipment to enhance your driving practice. So there's these super cool, awesome big mirrors that we can give people as your rear view mirror, and it makes it so much easier for driving. And sometimes you just have to give people an alternative to driving. So if you're lucky enough to live in a city, there's lots of transportation options. And maybe in a few years, Vancouver will get Uber. Who knows? So why do we have to evaluate driving? One thing to know, age alone does not determine a person's ability to remain a safe driver. Lots of older adults are safe drivers. They just make decisions to avoid driving situations in which they feel less confident. So they'll stop driving down into downtown Vancouver during crazy fireworks or during the Pride Parade because they know it's a pretty tense situation with lots of pedestrians making not great decisions. However, as you age, there will be changes in your abilities to make some activities more difficult. It is really important to recognize changes that can affect your ability to drive safely. Here's some examples. Your vision may change. So now you're more susceptible to glare. You might have changes in night vision. Maybe your visual field has changed after your stroke. So part of it, you just see black. And also your peripheral vision. Maybe that has changed as well. Looking at your physical abilities. Do you feel weak in your arms or your legs? Is there any stiffness in your knees or your shoulders or any sort of pain that would cause a slow movement and thus a slow reaction time? Looking at our cognition. So do we have difficulty now remembering, was there someone in my lane when I did my shoulder check? Making decisions, is this a good time to do a left turn? Or doing activities when their distractions are multitasking, such as various kids screaming in the back seat. So when should you get your driving checked? Well, if any of this following sound familiar, maybe it's time to make some changes to your driving strategies or have your driving evaluated. Here's some examples. You get lost. You just feel less confident. You notice other drivers honking at you all the time, and it's not due to the awesome car that you have. You miss stop signs or traffic lights. You mix up gas and brake pedals. You have problems with lane changes or merging, and you just can't time it properly. You have minor accidents or traffic tickets that are kind of adding up at the end of the day. Your passenger, whoever's sitting beside you, needs to help guide you and tell you when to turn. Or perhaps your family and friends just blatantly just refuse to get in the car with you. So these may be some signs that you need to get your driving checked. So everyone asks, how do I find an OT? Well, you should ask your family doctor or other healthcare professional that you're seeing, such as your physiotherapist, nurse, or chiropractor, for a referral to occupational therapy. They often know where to find us. You can use the CAOT website, www.caot.ca, and there's an area called Find an OT. If you're lucky, OT services may be assigned to you as part of your hospital stay or rehab treatment plan if you came into the hospital for sort of a knee injury or hip injury or stroke, but that's not always. And services may be accessed in your home or as an outpatient, and it depends whether it's free or private pay. So for free ones, I actually have a slide for that on how you can contact them and get it. And for private pay ones, I would say the best way is to use Google or the CAOT website. So I'm going to take questions in 1 second because I just want to make sure that I get these resources to you, and I'll come back to this slide. So here we go. I tried to do some work for you guys and find the health authorities throughout BC. So these are free OT services in the community. You only need to have a family doctor on file. You do not need a referral to get to see an OT in the community. You just need to have a care card and residency. So for Northern Health Authority, there is your link, Fraser Health. This is the phone number to call because their website is broken. Interior Health, this is where you can go to find the specific phone numbers and locations for where you live. And for Vancouver Coastal Health, I've given your phone number and your website. And Vancouver Island Health Authority, I've given all the phone numbers because that's a really big area. All right, so the very end as well. I've also put in the Canadian Association of OTs here, College of OTs, and it kind of tells you which website to go to depending what your question is. And over here, there's my contact info with a cute picture of where I got married earlier this year.
Yay! Beautiful. One thing, I guess 2 questions just to make sure that we answer them. When should someone start accessing an OT? I know you mentioned some of the maybe challenges that people may be facing, but is there kind of a specific time in the progression of disease or in ability to do, you talk about activities of daily living?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't actually think it's ever too early to access this. So one of the biggest things is when you notice the changes and that you cannot participate in your favorite activities. So whether that's your sports like swimming or taking your dog for a walk, or that you're noticing everyday activities are just a little harder. So pulling your credit cards from your wallet, just cutting a steak, doing your buttons or your zippers, or maybe that you're noticing some cognitive fatigue that you can't keep up with all the demands at work, or maybe from your crazy family. Those are some good times to access us as well.
Okay. And so in private practice, what's kind of the average rate, just so for people that they...
it would be anywhere between, I think, 110 and 140 per session with the OT.
Someone's asked, can an OT assist with bicycling?
Yes, we can. So I'm really lucky in Richmond. We have a really good bike shop nearby. So we often have a lot of clients go and rent the bike from there if they don't have their own, and we actually help them with biking. So I know we said we tend to do task-specific things, but first I have to look at different things. So someone's upper body coordination, their lower body coordination, their core strength, their balance, and we have to look at all of those before we can actually get the person on the bike. But because it's a coordination task, and if it's something that you want to learn to do or you did before, we can definitely help.
Great. Another question that I know comes up quite a bit in our community, because they are accessing lots of other allied health professionals who recommend different exercises or therapies. How do OTs or yourself at Enable Therapy work with other people's recommendations?
Oh, that's fantastic. So I'll give you two specific examples. So we work very closely with physios. So one of the things we do is if someone has a hip fracture or a knee replacement and they're recovering from that, the physios will give very specific exercises for recovery of that injury. And we will then work with that physio and the restrictions that maybe the physio has put there, or just observing any sort of conditions. And we work with them to allow the person to be able to participate in the activity. So if the physio or the orthopedic surgeon says, hey, they can't bend past 90 degrees, I go in and I make sure that their chair is set up with that 90 degrees in mind. Another example is working with counselors or psychologists. So often people are seeing them for feelings of anxiety or sadness or a clinical diagnosis of depression. They are fantastic at helping people with in-person counseling and therapy like that. So as an OT, what we will do is we will liaise with the counselor or psychologist, figuring out what things they're working on, what strategies they've used, and we will help the person to be able to implement that in the community and practice those strategies in the community.